Hello, and welcome back to another Bedtime Stories. Tonight we're going to be reading Chapter 20 of Mr. Tweedy. That morning it was very late before we continued our journey. After staying up most of the night, Mr. Tweedy was content to let us have our rest. A wind had sprung up, gently swaying the trailer, and the day was cool and lovely. When Kathy awoke, she was completely back to normal, happily busying herself scouring the inside of the car, while Dave and his pet took off to explore the area. I don't know why I said pet rock. 90s kid. Your parents will get that. After what had happened the preceding evening, I was a bit worried about Mr. Tweedy's safety. Without thinking, I told Dave not to let him fly off too far. "And how am I supposed to do that?" Dave asked with a smirk on his face. Of course, no sooner had the words come out when I realized the ridiculous implication of my request. Dave's candid remark got a laugh and a few wry comments from neighboring campers who didn't believe this bird even when they watched him playing with my son. Like Dave, Mr. Tweedy was becoming quite a ham actor, but I needn't have worried about his safety from other birds. Evidently, the episode had taught him a lesson in bird life, for thereafter, whenever he flew, he emitted a series of chucks to Dave. What this meant to other robins, I can only guess. Surely birds don't call to themselves, so the other birds must have thought he was calling to his parents. This must have been confusing to the other feathered creatures looking for the invisible parent robins, while this fresh little trespasser flies all around their private territory. Never again was he attacked by another bird. That day on the road was glorious, filled to the brim with fun and frolic. Kathy needed some new little plastic cups for her cafeteria, so we stopped at a roadside restaurant. Not only did the waitress give her some empty cups, she also gave the children individual sealed containers with mustard, ketchup, relish, jelly, salt, pepper, and sugar. This started something. Every good-sized restaurant we saw, the children had to go out and spend a nickel on candy, mints, or anything else, just to see how people would respond to the needs of a wild bird. This was fun for them, and quite an eye-opener for me. I hadn't realized how many people, given the opportunity, would want to help out a robin. By the end of the day, we could have started our own restaurant. That night, we stopped at a regular trailer park for the first time. The septic tank was dreadfully in need of being emptied, and being a nurse, I wouldn't have dreamed of just emptying the excreta anywhere. In Canada, we had used a sewage trench. Hence, I was more than a bit shocked when, after paying my fee for the night, I was told to drive over to the edge of a sandbank and empty the tank. What a stench, and what an invitation to disease. Had I been more civic-minded at the time, I would have reported this to the Board of Health. However, the next morning, I did speak to the owner of the park, explaining the medical reasons for not using an open sandbank for sewage. He hadn't thought of the disease angle, just the stink. But he'd planned to bury it over anyway. Now he'd try to do it sooner. This following day was exceedingly hot again. As a respite from traveling, I decided to stop at Missouri Merrimack Caverns. The children could make the refreshing underground tour. For my part, I'd just as soon stay with Mr. Tweedy. Even though my hip wasn't feeling too bad, a walking tour didn't tempt me. However, as I explained to the children how they should behave themselves and stay together, Mr. Tweedy began scolding. It was the funniest thing. Then, when they took off, he wouldn't stay with me. So finally, I had to go with the children. This seemed to suit Mr. Tweedy to a T. Even with all the windows open, he stayed in the car while I hobbled away with my children. Upon our return, I was heartsick when I saw the car was empty. Mr. Tweedy was nowhere to be seen. But then suddenly I heard his familiar call. Evidently, he had seen our approach and decided to play hide and seek. With a sigh of relief, I spoke to the empty car. "Come on, you rascal, or we'll leave without you." No falser statement was ever spoken. Again he chirped, but this time loudly, so the children could tell exactly where he was. With his back feathers blending perfectly with the ground so that his presence was completely camouflaged, there he sat amongst a cluster of leaves. As the children ran towards him, he flew to Dave's shoulder. All this while, two rough-looking, full-grown boys were watching. When they saw the robin fly to Dave, they moved closer, but stopped about 20 feet short of him. Remembering how other boys and grown-ups too reacted to Mr. Tweedy, I thought to myself, this is rather unusual. I was about to learn the reason. "Hey, what's that? A trained bird?" one asked loudly. "No, he's just a pet, Dave answered. Some pet, the other one sneered. He sure is vicious. Now my ears perked up. Mr. Tweedy vicious? Dave also had been startled. What do you mean, vicious? Dave countered. He wouldn't hurt a flea. Oh, yeah? Sneered the rowdy again. Why, sure, Dave answered. Then, wanting to prove his point, added, Come here, and I'll make him fly to you. He had taken a few steps forward, the boys a few steps backwards. Hey, you keep away from us, the first one ordered. Yeah, get away with that bird, the second one said sharply. Then, nudging his buddy, added, Let's get out of here, and off they went. Completely puzzled and angered by the boys' abusive language, I ordered my children to come along and get into the car. An elderly lady, seeing this, hurried over to tell me a bit of unbelievable news. During our absence, these boys had gone over to our car. Whether to steal it or something out of it, she didn't know. And then suddenly she had heard this loud chattering of a bird and saw the boys jump away from the car. Evidently, Mr. Tweedy had snapped at them because she had heard the boys talking about it. Remembering how he behaved, call it viciously if you like, in a game of tug-of-war, I would well imagine how he could have frightened two unsuspecting ruffians. No doubt they had seen Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, and stupid enough to think gruesome fantasy was a fact. Whatever, our innocent little Robin had done us yet another service. At Route 66 was a lovely divided highway at this stretch. I had hopes of getting us into Oklahoma before the night stop. Mr. Tweedy, however, didn't agree with my plans. When he had only reached Marshfield, Missouri, he had put up such a fuss at a gas station wanting to go out and fly, that I decided to call a halt for the day and let him have all the flying time he wanted. After the morning episode, he deserved to be catered to a bit. Then, too, there was another travel trailer parked at the side of this garage, so perhaps Mr. Tweedy hadn't picked such a bad spot. At night, we wouldn't be alone. The following morning, this spot proved a blessing. That afternoon, once again, the children played all sorts of games with their Robin, to the usual astonishment of all the spectators. After supper, however, you couldn't have paid them to set foot out of the trailer. At dusk, there were other flying creatures around. Bats! So Dave and Mr. Tweedy in the upper bunk and Kathy from the lower bunk spent the evening observing these strange little creatures from behind screened windows, while I used the time to good advantage, catching up on my travel log. The following morning, I awoke to the sound of a robin singing for the first time at the top of his lungs. This was all right with me until I realized that our trailer was slanted like the deck of a ship in a storm. A fine thing. The trailer had developed a flat tire during the night, and there was my helper singing away to beat the band. Evidently, he liked the new slanted angle of his perch. When I realized where we were parked, I could have sung too. What a better place to develop a flat tire than right beside a service garage. As luck would have it, this morning there was only one attendant around. With cars coming in constantly for gas, he said it might be a while before he could completely take care of things. For the moment, he had only time to jack up the trailer and remove the wheel. Thus, with the trailer even more slanted in the opposite direction, I fixed breakfast. What a circus this had turned into. The dishes slid, I dropped an egg, Dave knocked over a glass of milk, but nothing could upset me this morning. Mr. Tweedy was acting so absolutely crazy that we were in stitches laughing at him, the highlight coming when he flew in from David's bunk. Landing on the table, he skidded a foot, right through the milk. And then, the way he turned and looked at the mess and at Dave as if he were thinking, I'll bet you did that on purpose. Laugh, we were doubled over. The ludicrous meal completed, it was time for exercise. But no sooner had the trio stepped out of the trailer when the children called me to look at the weird horizon. As far as the eye could reach, it had turned into an inky black. Within moments, the breeze had turned into a wind that was plowing through like a freight train. In haste, I closed up the trailer. Then, with the children's assistance, I hurried into the little brick restaurant connected to the service garage. One robin happily peeking out from inside David's summer jacket. Leaving the children in a booth, I hobbled the few steps to the door leading into the garage. I was worried about the wind, our trailer being on a slant. What on earth is happening? I called out to the attendant as a great huge carton went hurtling through the air. Is this a tornado? It's not a twister, but it's a bad one. He called back as he hurried toward me in the shelter of the garage. You sure were lucky getting this flat. I've got those jacks leaning her into the wind. They'll help hold her. Without them, he shrugged his shoulders descriptively, just thank God you weren't further down on the open road. A piece of flat metal went flying by. With chills running up my spine, I hobbled back through the doorway into the restaurant. Within seconds, this little solid brick building containing a single room for dining with 2 restrooms to the rear had become a refuge for frightened tourists who had parked their cars in hopes of safety beside and behind the garage. Not only had the storm increased in velocity, but torrents of rain were pummeling the building. What the inside of our little trailer would look like, I didn't even dare think about. With people milling about like frightened cattle about to stampede, this was no place for a robin. I could almost picture the panic an innocent little zooming bird might cause. With only the nearest guest watching apprehensively, I carefully removed Mr. Tweedy from inside David's jacket. Then, holding him gently but firmly against my breast with Kathy's assistance, I hobbled into the ladies' room. Behind a locked door, while the sun ran its short but devastating course, one robin found that a leaky faucet made a perfect shower bath. This didn't change my worries about the trailer, but helped a lot, being entertained by a little clown. Almost as suddenly as it had come up, the freakish storm passed on, leaving a cluttered mess of debris in a wake. In no time, the other tourists were on their separate ways, and in brilliant sunshine, cooled now by a gentle breeze, the children and Mr. Tweedy went out to exercise while I went to see about the tire. Entering the garage again by the inside door, I was puzzled to find the tenant staring at it and doing nothing. Perplexed, I asked, "What's the matter? Can't you fix it?" "There's just the trouble, lady." That's just the trouble, lady," he answered. "There isn't anything to fix. I filled it with air, and it doesn't leak." "Then I guess somebody must have let the air out on purpose," I answered simply, remembering the rowdy boys and the ones who had shot up our windshield. But why hadn't I heard it? "That's impossible," the attendant said, interrupting my thoughts. "The air cap was caked solid with dirt. Guess it must have been a pinhead leak that sealed itself off when the tire went flat. Not that I remembered it then, but this was the tire with the patch. Evidently, pulling into the driveway, the tire must have rubbed against the curbing, dislodging a tiny portion of the patch. The overnight pressure from the weight of the trailer evidently resealed the patch, for it never leaked again in over 7,000 miles of travel." Having at least partially satisfied himself that the tire would be alright, he said he'd put it back on the trailer, but for me to keep an eye on it every now and again, just to be on the safe side. With all the things that I had already had to watch, the plumbing, the gas, the roof, and now a tire, I felt absolutely sick. "You mean I'm to travel with a defective tire?" I asked, now and almost in tears. "With your kind of luck and that robin, I wouldn't worry," he said reassuringly as he rolled the firm tire toward the trailer, where the children were playing with Mr. Tweedy. As I hobbled behind him, using the building to good advantage, he was saying, "I don't know who's watching over you, lady, but someone sure is. A wild bird keeping you and your kids safe? If I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't believe it." As I opened the trailer door, I thought to myself, join the club. The jacks had kept the trailer safe against the wind. But more than that, the slanting roof had kept the water from leaking in during the storm. That ends the reading of Chapter 20 from Mr. Tweedy by Anne-Marie Schilling. We will end tonight with bedtime prayer. Lord, I thank you for everyone who's listening. I pray that you give them a safe and great day tomorrow. I pray that you give them sound sleep tonight. Hope that they wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. May you show them your love and mercy and grace in fresh and new ways each and every day. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Tune in tomorrow for Chapter 21. Good night.